Okay, folks, this is going to be fairly simple, but a little tricky, if I can say it that way. Very, very common thing that I get all the time is that you'll get a leak. Now, obviously, this machine is not operational, so I can't demo it. Hose is plugged in, you request steam. Steam comes billowing out here. You have really nothing coming out of the gun. So you request steam. You're clicking your trigger, everything's operating the way it should be, but you're getting very little out of here and you're getting a ton coming out of here. So the problem is you got bad O-rings. 99% of the time, there's an O-ring problem. So we disconnect the hose. Now, there's a couple of things. Sometimes people will say, my hose won't go in. It won't snap in. So we got to snap it in, and that spring-loaded button, that's what locks the hose in. It makes the electrical connection, and it makes the seal. If it doesn't go in, and you can only get it in that far, then I absolutely know that an O-ring rolled out of place. And you're probably also not getting the electrical connection. So how do we fix this? That's incorrectly. We want to be able to squeeze our steam trigger, not get a leak here, not have it come billowing out, and it looks like a catastrophe. So this is what we have. Now, this little flapper really doesn't mean anything. If you ever break this off, don't worry about it. Here's what we have in the front of the machine. So this is the way everything connects. So our hose goes in like this, it'll snap in and come out. Our setup is nipple on the right, pin connector on the left. Now, there's certain instances where we lose our electric signal to the solenoid valve, and sometimes this multi-pin connector is the problem, but that's an electrical thing that has to do with you not getting steam. Here is our nipple, and we have two O-rings on that nipple. So we have an O-ring there, and we have an O-ring in the back. They both have to be intact, good, and not missing for you not to get the leak. Very rarely does your nipple crack. These nipples are made of very good grade plastic that I very rarely see a nipple crack, especially on the outside. So the problem is always going to be here. It's never going to be here. The female part of your hose, that's your female nipple, there's no O-rings in here. So there's no O-rings in there. This is never the problem. So this is never, ever, ever the problem. Not an issue. This is the problem. So how do we do this? If I tell you to open the flap and we have good light and you get in there with a flashlight, sometimes you'll see that one or both of the O-rings is missing. It's very, very difficult to see if one of these O-rings is rolled to the back. But I guarantee if you can't get the hose to snap in, one of those O-rings is gone and it rolled all the way to the back. Now, the best way to keep your O-rings intact is to lubricate them either with a little bit of Vaseline on a brush once a week or spray it with some silicone. Everything gets hot and the O-rings get dried out and they tear. And the in and out of the hose can shear them and it can cause them to flatten out, it can cause them to rip. And if both of these O-rings aren't in good shape, you're going to get that leak. Now, a lot of times if you're handy and you got good tools, you can get in there with a little dental pick. This screwdriver is way too big. So we can't really get in there and maneuver these O-rings, especially the rear one, with a screwdriver like this. You got to get in there, and we don't want to get in there. I mean, you can pry them out. You can pry them out with a utility knife, but you don't want to put them in with a utility knife because I guarantee you're going to cut them on the way out. So there's two ways to do it. Either you can struggle, and when you get the O-rings out, you can roll them onto the nipple with your fingers. If you got nimble enough fingers, you can roll the first one on to get it in place. Then the second one can roll over that, and you can gently, with a screwdriver, kind of roll it into place so you got both of them. That's if you don't want to take this apart. This is a little bit of a pain in the butt. So to get this out, we'd have to zap out these 4 screws. So you zap out these 4 screws because we have to split this. This connector needs to split open. We can't split it open with it inside the machine. So these 4 screws would have to come out, and then you have enough room to get it out, and there's enough slack. We have our 2 wires for our pin connector, and then our steam hose goes in the back. So it's going to come out like this, and what you're going to see from the top is nothing. You're not going to see anything from the top. What you got to do is you got to rotate it. You got to rotate it to show these 4 screws. So I already have 3 of them out. So these 4 screws are what sandwich this together. So we got to get the last one out. Get the last one out, and now I carefully unsandwich this, which gives me access to both my nipple and my pin connector if I ever need to replace this pin connector. So our nipple, if we either have to replace the nipple itself, which this is the nipple, and this is the end of our steam hose inside the machine. So this steam hose comes off our adjuster valve. So this feeds our nipple, which feeds the hose, and that's how you get steam. Generally, if you have a nipple problem, it's going to shear off at the back. So when these get a little bit older and they get dried out and heated and cooled and heated and cooled, sometimes this nipple will just break off. It'll just break off right here, and the rest of the nipple will be inside the steam hose, and then you definitely have to replace the nipple. I very rarely see the nipple crack this way. I very rarely see the nipple crack there. I very rarely see the nipple crack there. So 99 times out of 100, it's going to be these O-rings. So you got to get these O-rings off, and then with this out, you can get in there with a utility knife. You can pry these out and easily get the new ones on. Getting it back together is a little bit tricky. This is always going to fall out. There's no way that's going to stay in as you're working with this. This is going to pop out. So this is always going to pop out. This is always going to pop out. You got to get it back in. Screw side up. So screw side up when you put this back in. And you got to kind of maneuver this so it sits in tight. So we get that back in, and we want to make sure that the back part is in, and it kind of lines up with this groove right here. So that's about how far in it goes. If it's too far back, it's not going to fit. And if it's any farther forward than this corner right here, then it's not right either, because this top part's not going to clamp in. So this is the way, and this is the more tricky part. So this is about the way it lines up. Hopefully that helps you. And this is the way it lines up in the back. And then just make sure that the wires go through the back hole. Getting the nipple in is a little bit easier. Once you got your O-rings on your new nipple, we lay our nipple in, and it fits over this groove, and this line just sits up at 12 o'clock, and it locks in place. So that's much easier. You would first put your steam hose on. Now again, you're going to get one of these clamps from the factory. Break it, discard it, get rid of that. And then we have the ear clamp. So clamp goes on first. We get our twist it in. This is all done outside the connector. Get your clamp lined up. Squeeze your clamp with a pair of side cutters. Squeeze your clamp to get it tight so we don't get a leak on the back side of the nipple. Then when you mount your nipple just like that. So these 2 humps, one hump is on the inside of this groove, one hump is on the inside, one hump is on the outside, and this little lever goes just like that. That should allow us now to get the top sandwiched in place where it's going to fit nice and tight. And now I got it nice and tight. And I can put my screws in here, it'll close it. If I have any kind of gap, if we have any kind of gap like that, hose isn't going to go in. So if we have any kind of gap, don't even attempt it. You're not going to be able to force it. It has to sit flat. It has to sit flat to begin with before you put your screws in. And now we know when we put this back in, so when we put it back in the machine, our screws are like this, or screws are up. We have to remember to turn it over, because the nipple is always on the right. Right now the nipple's on the left, and our connector's on the right. We need to turn it over, and the screw holes face down. We turn it over like this, our screws are already tight, slide it back into the machine, and then get these screws lined up, and zip your screws back in, and the repair is done. So that's the more difficult, but it's a little bit more difficult, but then you'll know when you get those O-rings on those grooves that they're going to be perfect. And when you reconnect your hose, the hose is going to slide in, the hose is going to lock, and you won't get a leak the next time you request steam. You're going to have to replace O-rings. So as I tell everybody, let me grab my gun. As I tell everybody, the O-rings are, the nipple and the O-rings are exactly the same, this part of the gun. So this part of the gun, we look through that rectangular slot, our nipple and our O-rings are exactly the same as they are there. So those are both going to be the same. Replacing these O-rings are still tricky, but a lot of times you can get your tool in from the top and kind of crawl the O-rings out and then crawl the O-rings in. Generally, you don't need to split the gun. If you would need to split the gun, you'd have to take that band off the front and then 1, 2, 3, 4 screws come out, and then just be careful of your trigger to make sure that your trigger lines back up when you put it back together. But O-rings are a maintenance thing. So you got to keep your O-rings in good shape. If one O-ring fails, you're probably going to get a leak. You're going to get hot water leaking down the gun. It's going to burn your hand. It's not pleasant, but you got to keep an eye on your O-rings. They're on the site under parts. And all these parts replacements that we're going over, all the parts are listed on the site. If I determine it's warranty, I'll just send it to you. If I determine it's not warranty, you can buy it on the site. And again, we're hoping now you can refer to these videos as assistance in the parts replacement. And you can always call me, but now instead of me verbalizing it or in an email trying to explain it, or even send one picture, we're doing these series of videos to hopefully make it easier. And again, I really don't care if my competitors see this. Nobody's going to copy my machine. I'm putting it out there. We're to the point now where we have a lot of machines out there, and machines that are out there for a long period of time. And because it's a Chief steamer, they get used every day, all day long. They're going to break, and they're going to need parts replacements. And I'm here to help with the parts replacements to get you going a lot quicker. And we hope you appreciate that.